In 2010, horror fans lined up to see Freeway K𝖎ller, a movie that promised gritty realism in sharing the story of California's own freeway killer, William Bonin. On today's episode, we will take a look at both the movie and the horrifying real-life case that inspired it. Grab some popcorn and join us as we sink into the darkness and explore the story of the Freeway K𝖎ller. Horror films have long drawn inspiration from real-life events. Many movies make claims of being based on a true story, but most deviate from the truth in favor of sensationalism and entertainment value. However, the 2010 premiere of Freeway K𝖎ller promised audiences gripping realism following the case of California's real freeway killer, William Bonin. Freeway K𝖎ller walks the fine line between fact and fiction, and to separate fantasy from reality, we must dive into the terrifying true story that inspired it. Freeway K𝖎ller, directed by John 𝕱𝖉𝖎𝖆, first hit theaters on February 16, 2010. The story of William Bonin, a Vietnam veteran and truck driver turned sadistic murderer, is told through a series of flashbacks as Bonin describes his life to the mother of one of his victims just prior to his execution. The first flashback shows Bonin and his young accomplice, Vernon Butts, murdering a teenage hitchhiker. Shortly after, Bonin begins plotting to murder a local teen by the name of Kyle Peterson. Bonin had planned to kill Kyle, who worked at a shop in town, but instead decided to bring Kyle in as a secondary accomplice. Together, Bonin and his two accomplices commit a spree of horrific crimes, including torture, rape, and murder of young men and boys in California. As the spree continues, Bonin begins to feel mounting pressure from the police as they hunt for the Freeway K𝖎ller. Bonin picks up a teenage hitchhiker, even though he knows he's being followed by a suspicious vehicle. Once inside the car, Bonin's nervous behavior causes the teen to think twice about taking a free ride, and he attempts to exit the vehicle. Bonin stops him and begins strangling him with a tire iron and his own shirt. The police, who have been keeping Bonin under surveillance, move in to make the arrest. Bonin is taken into custody and readily admits to his crimes. He identifies his two accomplices, and both are apprehended shortly after. Vernon succeeds in taking his own life while being held in jail. Bonin himself is sentenced to the death penalty for his crimes. The film concludes with a return to the opening, Bonin conversing with the mother of one of his victims. She vows to attend his execution, and in the closing scenes, we see her present on that day, gripping a photo of her beloved son. The film was hauntingly graphic, and the producers and creative directors did not shy away from depicting the brutality of Bonin's crimes. But how accurate is the portrayal of the real-life William Bonin? To answer that, we will now explore the true story of California's infamous Freeway K𝖎ller. William Bonin was born in 1947 in southern Connecticut as the middle child of his parents' three sons. Both Bonin's parents were alcoholics, and his father, a World War II veteran, was frequently both verbally and physically abusive. They had the financial means to properly care for their three children, but instead preferred to spend their money on their addictions, namely alcohol and gambling. This left the three young boys often without their basic needs met. On one occasion, were it not for the kindness of a neighbor who took pity on them, the children would not have had clean clothes or food. After excess spending on their vices forced Bonin's parents out of the family home, the boys and their parents moved in with Bonin's maternal grandmother. This did not provide relief from the abuse. In fact, it far worsened the situation. Bonin's mother had been sexually abused by her own mother growing up, and yet she left her young sons at the mercy of the same woman who had abused her. Bonin's mother later suspected her father had also sexually abused Bonin and his brothers. All this suffering occurred in the first 5 years of Bonin's life, a series of tragedies that certainly shaped the monster he became. By age 6, Bonin had already begun having trouble at school. He and his older brother were sent away to the Franco-American school in nearby Massachusetts. The school was run by a convent of nuns who found no quarrel with punishing the boys however they deemed necessary, including forcing them to punch fences repeatedly when they'd misbehaved. Less than 2 years into his stay at the school, Bonin was tied up and sexually assaulted by an older student. While enrolled at the school, Bonin's parents never once came to visit either of their sons. Bonin began to worry that his parents had died, but in reality, they simply didn't care enough to visit. In 1955, Bonin returned to live with his parents and grandmother back in Connecticut. The problems at school continued, but Bonin had become much more violent and aggressive. He found himself in juvenile detention by 1957 for petty theft and minor crimes. While being held at the detention center, 10-year-old Bonin was again sexually assaulted, this time by a counselor. By the time Bonin became a teen, his deeply damaged psyche became apparent. Bonin dropped out of high school in 1966 and was suspected of having sexually assaulted multiple children in his neighborhood. His mother, who knew of his violent urges and inappropriate attraction to younger boys, boldly denied that Bonin was responsible. Though she denied it outwardly, Bonin's mother knew there was something seriously wrong with her son. She forced Bonin to leave the family home, and she strongly encouraged him to propose to Linda, a girl he had briefly dated. Linda accepted the proposal, but this is a decision she would soon come to regret, as Bonin began describing a recurring dream in which he raped and murdered a young woman. Forced out of his home and without a high school diploma, Bonin enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. Not long after, he was deployed to Vietnam. In his nearly 3 years serving in the military, Bonin was awarded a medal for his bravery after he risked his own life to save a fellow airman that had been severely wounded. Despite this, Bonin left the military with a strong sense that human life is incredibly overvalued. He was honorably discharged on October 25, 1968. When he returned home, he found that Linda had run off to marry another man. The trauma of his childhood, the PTSD incurred from his military service, and Linda's abandonment finally broke something in Bonin, and in November of 1968, he began a 3-month spree of horrific violence. After a string of assaults and rapes, Bonin was arrested on January 28, 1969. The courts deemed him to be a treatable sex offender and reprimanded him to the care of 𝖘𝖔𝖈𝖎𝖆 State Hospital. Bonin was released in June of 1974, and the medical staff believed he was no longer a danger to others. Less than a year after his release, Bonin proved them wrong. He picked up a 14-year-old hitchhiker and forced him at gunpoint to undress in a field. Bonin raped and strangled the boy, but stopped just shy of killing him and, according to the victim's own testimony, apologized. Bonin then said, "You know what? You're an alright guy. I was going to kill you, but I want to come back for you and use you again." Bonin was arrested again in October of 1975, with the testimony of that victim aiding the prosecution's case. Bonin was outraged by this, and he gave police a sinister warning. Next time, there won't be any more witnesses. Bonin was convicted and served less than 3 years before being released on an 18-month probation. Immediately upon his parole ending, Bonin made good on his word. He would leave no witnesses behind to testify against him. Bonin formed a series of partnerships with young accomplices, including Vernon Butts. Bonin and his accomplices, or on occasion Bonin alone, raped, tortured, and murdered young boys ages 12 to 19. The media dubbed Bonin the Freeway Killer, thanks to his habit of picking up hitchhikers along local highways. Bonin was obsessed with the media frenzy, clipping and saving newspaper articles to show off to his accomplices and co-workers. Bonin's biggest and most brutal spree ran from May of 1979 through June of 1980. By the summer, police had identified Bonin as their primary suspect and began 24/7 surveillance. Bonin was finally arrested on June 11, 1980. He was convicted of murdering 14 victims, but he confessed in graphic detail to having murdered 21. Experts believe the actual number may be much higher. Bonin's accomplices were also arrested, and Bonin himself was sentenced to death. On February 23, 1996, William Bonin was executed via lethal injection at California's San Quentin State Prison. Bonin died without ever having shown a shred of guilt or remorse for the horrific things he'd done. So, what did the Freeway Killer movie get right, and what did it get wrong? To the film's credit, it did not fall victim to the common issue of glamorizing or glorifying the killer. Bonin is not portrayed as complex, mysterious, or deserving of sympathy. The movie displays Bonin as the brutal monster that he was. Overall, the film is accurate in its depiction of Bonin's graphic and cruel violence. Some creative liberties were taken, such as condensing the timeline, omitting several murders, and modifying the story of Bonin's accomplices, but the movie was largely an accurate depiction of the case. However, by avoiding taking on a sympathetic attitude towards Bonin, the film also avoids exploring the extent of horrific abuse he suffered in his youth. This lends well to the goal of not humanizing a monster, but it also denies the complexities of what lead a person to become such a monster. The movie also spent little time addressing the victims, which is often the case with such films, but minimizes the unspeakable pain and suffering endured by innocent victims and their families. Although the movie did not capture the full story of William Bonin, it is regarded as a fairly accurate depiction of the real-life Freeway Killer. The 2010 film Freeway Killer provides a graphic, brutal, and mostly factual retelling of the real Freeway Killer case. The movie avoids glorifying the titular serial killer, but also avoids exploring the trauma that made Bonin the monster he became. The story of William Bonin serves as a haunting reminder that evil does not always lurk in the shadows. It lurks in broad daylight, in our communities, in an unassuming van driving down the freeway, unnoticed until it's too late. The chilling story of the Freeway Killer shall remain in infamy, in the minds of horror audiences, in the hearts of those who suffered great loss, and as yet another tale from the underworld.
If you enjoyed this true crime story, don't forget to like and subscribe and let us know what you think in the comments. Want to watch another chilling tale from the underworld? Check out these other videos on screen.